Welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. Tonight we have our first author interview with Richard Bartrand, author of So You Think You're an Atheist? Questions That Haunt the Soul. Why Do I Believe What I Believe? I found Rick and his book in an indie authors group, and when I read the title, I felt like this would be an interesting book to read and an interesting conversation to have on the podcast. So, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, we don't know you, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in Michigan. Um, I took on most of the artistic side of life, like painting, photography, sketching, woodworking. Um, I got into music for a little bit. I do DIY handyman stuff, computer design, and my latest outlet is writing. And I've actually been writing for probably 20 plus years, but mainly just because I wanted to brain dump, just get stuff out of my head.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until maybe a few years ago that I started looking through all the things that I had on my computer that I have written for the past 20 years and thought that some of them might be interesting in a book. Actually, my first book was based on about 5 years of just posting little positive snippets on social media. Um, so that was actually my first book.
What's that called?
It's called Bite Size Life Lessons.
Nice.
Nice.
I love that. So,
Uh,
how many books do you have out?
I have two out right now, but I have probably about five more on the back burner.
Nice. Yeah. So, it seems like you've lived kind of an eclectic life and finding different ways of expressing yourself.
Yeah, mainly because I couldn't stand still for more than a few minutes at a time.
Hmm.
But then again, I was an over the road truck driver for on and off for about 25 years. So that's all I
Wow.
had to do was just sit there and think.
And
So I
think.
developed a very, very deep thinking process of if I had a question, I just dug into it as far as I could get it,
Hmm.
which is
And
what sprouted this last book.
yeah. And yeah, you had a lot of time to ponder things over and really deep dive within yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background with spirituality and religion.
I was raised religious, raised in the church. And we went every single time the door was open, we were in church, two times on Sunday, once on Wednesday, all the potlucks, all the dinners, all the gatherings. So I got my share of what um, religion was like. Uh, there are good points and bad points. Um, but I didn't really take on the view of spirituality until well, after I left the church and after I had a little episode with atheism. If you're raised in church, you tend to want um, to play the part. So I would talk to people, but it was more of a uh, like a rehearsed um, conversation more than a heartfelt one. So I started questioning things. Things started to I saw little inconsistencies here and there, which caused a lot of confusion, and that's when I really started digging into why I believe what I believe instead of just believing it because somebody told me that's what I should believe.
Hmm. How
It's
old were
important for
you?
everybody to ask themselves those kind of questions for sure.
Yeah.
You should know why you think what you think. About what age range would that have been when you started to ask those questions?
Late teens. Until then, it was more of just a routine. Um, I really didn't even think too much about it, in the beginning, because that's the way I was raised. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of develop into an adult what you learned as a child. And it wasn't until I started thinking for myself to where it was like, well, hey, wait a minute, why is it that I believe what I believe?
Mm-hmm.
And I started questioning myself.
What were some of those questions you asked yourself?
Why do I have to act different inside of a building called church than when I'm on the outside of it? Like a lot of people on the inside of the church, they're almost robotic in their actions, and it's this almost this invisible expectation to be perfect. And uh, you're told to be real because they accept you for who you are, and then if you are real inside of a building called church, then you're sort of judged for it. So I found it was more of a tactic to try to scare people out of hell rather than love people into heaven. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
it was a weird place to be at the time
Mm-hmm.
with all the questions that I had.
That's an interesting way to put it, scare people out of hell rather than love them into heaven. I think that there's unfortunately a lot of religious doctrines that take that approach,
Right.
and I mean, and in Christianity, there is a lot of talk about love, but that's not always carried over in the sermons or the other messaging, that people hear every Sunday or any day that they're going to church.
No, the situation that you're describing sounds a lot like my Baptist upbringing, to be really honest with you. You know, yeah, that story could be my story too, up until about, early teens for me as well. So it's interesting. That's, kind of a similar beginning in a way. Um,
Mhm.
and it is interesting, like when you start to think for yourself and you start to ask yourself questions like, why do people act differently in these situations? And do I want to be like that? Do I want that to be the person that I am? You can find yourself going off in a lot of different directions because of that, you know.
I went into a lot of different directions. I uncovered a lot of different rabbit holes.
Yeah. What were some of those rabbit holes?
Uh, well, after after I graduated high school, I joined the military, and when I did that, I was like, I'm free. I'm free from being forced to go into this place called church, and because I never really wanted to pay attention anyway, I was always in the back row or the back pew, drawing or talking with friends. So that's the last thing I wanted to do was go to church after I graduated. And one of the rabbit holes I went down was atheism, because after I left the church, I thought um, it was more like a default alternative just to go right into atheism, because as far as I was concerned, church and God were synonymous. They were one and the same. So naturally, I just went into atheism,
Because
and
it felt like the opposite, kind of, maybe.
I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought back then. Even though, yeah, it is kind of like the opposite. But on the same token, it's kind of like a same, because it's still a belief system. It's still a worldview. It's something that you grab hold of and embrace at the time, because that's what you were led to do. And I still at that time never really gave it much thought. I just didn't want anything to do with church, so I went in the opposite direction. Yeah, and like I said, I thought that was the alternative decision, the alternative lifestyle, or the default alternative lifestyle. There wasn't any in between.
But what brought you to start questioning atheism?
Again, it was the inconsistencies in the theory, such as like they've got a plethora of fossil records of each species. But when it comes to the transitions between those species, there's none. And the ones that they do claim as transitional beings from species to species, I thought it was almost reaching for straws, because there are so few and far between, and even the ones, and I wrote this in the book also, the inconsistencies of the claims of the transitional beings, and most of them were found to be frauds. And even if every single one of the findings was true, in comparison to the actual species that they have on record now, doesn't even come close, when in all actuality there should be just as many transitional species as there are each species. And one of the chapters I dedicated the whole chapter to, I call it the smoking gun. And that's when I started digging into the human cell and everything that had to be in place before life could even be. And what I found was just there was way too many things that needed to be in place in order for it to have put itself together in order to be ready to become alive. And that kind of is what was the last straw for me. There was a million other things in the process, but when I got to that, it was like, wow. That took a while to absorb all of what has to be in place in order for life to even exist.
Mm-hmm. Your book is very interesting because I feel like it asks a lot of questions, and it's trying to look at things through a couple of different lenses. And I think something that resonated with me is, what you were just talking about, like with the cell, like the complexity of it, or, you talk about like the Big Bang Theory, and, nobody was there at the beginning of time. So how do we know this is exactly what happened or what the cause of it was? So to me, it's like, it's interesting to just play around with those thoughts and those questions, and I like how you really took like a deep dive into trying to research some of these things. Help draw the connection for us. You were talking a few minutes ago about, to me, it was like evolution, and kind of questioning some of that theory of evolution. So what's the connection between atheism doesn't make sense anymore and the potential possible holes in evolutionary theory?
The title of the book is one of the biggest questions I had to ask myself. It was actually a question that I asked myself, and I thought that would make an interesting title. But and like you said, it was all the questions that are in the book are questions that I had to ask myself. And once it got to a point that there were just way too many questions that I could not I couldn't answer, and that didn't make sense to me inside of evolution, the theory of evolution, or I should say the Darwinian theory of evolution, because we're all kind of evolving in a way, but more like, I think it's more like adaptation than Darwinian evolution, because we are beings that are meant to adapt. And like the finch beaks that Darwin was mentioning, that it changed from species to species, but it wasn't species to species, because all the finches are all birds. They just adapted to different environments. And even through the mating process, if one aspect of one bird is more prominent, and then it mated with another bird that was less prominent in that area, then of course the offspring would show that. So let's say two birds with shorter beaks mated, which created another offspring that had even shorter beaks, and it just kept adapting, not evolving, which is a lot of confusion that I thought of in the beginning, until I realized that most of it's adaptation, not evolution. And all the other personal inventories I had to go through and be brutally honest with myself, because I didn't want to believe in God, wasn't really a reason for me to be an atheist, even though that's what I jumped into. But when I started asking myself questions, it's like, why am I claiming atheism? And then I came up with that conclusion that it was almost like the default alternative from religion. And then I started contemplating that, thinking, okay, what if there is a middle ground? What if religion and its laws and bylaws and rules and regulations were imposed on people that, because everybody has different perceptions. I mean, two people can be raised in the same household and have completely different outlooks.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
So inside of the church, what would happen if I had a completely negative outlook, and somebody else that was going to the same church had a completely positive outlook, and they became a pastor and sold out to the religion. And going back to religion, and when I really started questioning that too, is because I started going to different religions. I started going to many different religions, and there was almost this underlying belief that their religion was the religion. That there was, well, come in, you can believe the way we believe, and we'll just pray for everybody else and hope that they come around sometime soon. So I'm like, well, not everybody can be right.
Right.
Which, that's another thing that I started questioning inside of religion, also going back to that.
And lucky you found the one, right? Oh,
yeah.
Congratulations, I guess. Yeah. No, that's a series of good points, I think. I mean, personally, I think that everyone should question everything all the time. Right. And I, in my own life, have spent my life that way, and still sometimes find myself having to ask myself, well, do I actually think this thing, or is this something that I've just decided to go along with because I've always felt this way? And even, I'm in my 40s, and I've been asking these questions since I was 12 years old, and I'm still finding things where I'm like, well, maybe I actually just think this thing because someone told me that when I was a kid, or I just assumed it, or it was the opposite of something that I didn't like. So that's kind of where I think there's some similarities there for me personally. I don't know that I feel like one thing that's interesting to me that you just talked about, like, I think that the adaptation thing, I think that as people, as scientists and these researchers in general learn more things, I think that modern, people who are doing that work are leaning more towards this is adaptation. Like, especially like in the animal kingdom, the animals that can best get the food in their area, those traits are going to be more dominant, and the traits are going to die out of the ones that don't. And, I, as a person, and to the point where most people around me are probably sick of hearing me say it, lament a lot about the failure of the English language. Like I think we don't have the right words for a bunch of things. And so whenever, we're saying something like, you know, Darwinian evolution versus adaptation versus some other term we have not come up with yet that would be more to the point, there's a lack there.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
So for the people who are not science brained, me over here, what would be the difference between adaptation and Darwinian evolution?
That's like turtles, for instance, that, or tortoises, the big tortoises. They would say that, that a short-necked tortoise, or whoever started first, they needed to reach vegetation on a higher branch, so they evolved longer necks to reach that. The viewpoint of adaptation would be that the shorter-necked tortoises gravitated towards all the vegetation that was lower, and there were other turtles that already existed that had longer necks through adaptation, through reproduction, would migrate more towards the vegetation that was higher. So evolution would be changing from short neck to a long neck. Adaptation would just be, or well, I guess that would be adaptation too, sort of, or somewhat like a shorter neck would adapt into the environment, and through reproduction, through natural causes, just develop longer necks. It didn't have anything to do with survival. It just had to do with, that's how they reproduced or adapted.
Okay.
And Darwinian evolution is from one species to a next, or another, which would mean, a turtle to a donkey, or whatever the next chain of command up there is.
Right. So it's like with adaptation, you're leaving room that there's multiple types of the same species. Like you were talking about the finches, and I'm kind of thinking of like dog breeds, right? Like there's not just one type of dog. There's been adaptations throughout. And, right? Am I speaking scientifically here?
Well, I'm not a huge I don't know a whole lot of the lingo in science anyway. I just kind of, it intrigues me. I love science. I'm not a scientist by any stretch, but I did all my research through reading and watching videos of scientists, and but I found that a lot of their wording was assumptive and expecting you to fill in a lot of gaps that they couldn't explain. And it's in those gaps that I had the massive questions on. And they still can't answer a lot of those gaps, even now with all the technology that they have today.
Yeah, we're still learning and still expanding our knowledge, and there's definitely not answers for everything. I mean, that's kind of the premise of our podcast, is like people coming on and being like, I had this strange experience that I can't explain and science can't explain yet. You know what I mean? So it's like there's still a lot of things we don't know about how the universe works.
Which is when I started opening up my mind, because when I was in religion, it was like I said, I had this almost memorized script of words that I would say to people that didn't believe, to try to convince them to the way I believed. So I was closed off to one way of thinking. And then I experienced the other side in atheism, which then I started studying my script to talk to religious people about, trying to convert them over to atheism, or not believe in God anymore because of all this other stuff. But then it wasn't until I let go of both uh, is when I found uh, what I have settled on to be a creator. That was kind of like my final resting spot, my place that I, put the flag down in the ground and okay, this is the way I believe now. Because of all uh, the other things that I went through inside of religion and atheism, which yes, I have concluded a creator, a source of life, not a religious dictator, not a I've heard all the stories as far as if there was a loving God, then why this? The whole if God wants to teach you a lesson, he grabs your hand and shoves it on a hot coal to teach you that it's hot, which no, that's a man-made religious, not anti-religious, trying to not believe in God because and I've boiled it down too. Also in the book, there's about 3 or 4 different reasons why people don't believe in a creator, and most of them is because you're either raised atheist or you were burnt by somebody in the church and you're angry with God. But how can you be angry with an entity that you don't believe in? So
That's a good point. I know for me, and I definitely want Jonathan to chime in if he wants to, but um when I first started like my spiritual path, so I was raised in the Catholic Church. It never really resonated with me, and so I spent a lot of time in like my 20s trying to figure out what did resonate with me. And I remember like hearing people talk, like I believed in what I'll call spirit or the universe, right? But when people would use the word God, it would trigger me because of my experiences with that religious upbringing. And so it's just interesting, like that even though I'm talking about the same thing, but just that word, because of my
right.
experiences before, it felt very different. It doesn't feel that way anymore, but it's just, it's interesting.
Well, it's the same. Actually, I stopped using the word God because that is it's so uh, it's so universal or so different in everybody's belief system. Because to one person, God is everything,
Hmm.
and to another person, God is pizza or their next meal or themselves or
Yeah.
so. God has this. Whatever meaning it is to each individual person. So I kind of stopped using the word God because everybody agrees with you that there's a God because God is God, the devil's God, pizza's God, like I said, or self is God. So I started using the source of life, which kind of breaks it down even further, a little bit less uh, write your own ticket kind of thing.
Hmm.
Also, it doesn't really require an intention, you know,
Right.
which I can appreciate that for sure. I mean, personally for me, when I started, realizing when I was a teen that most of the people around me who were acting, capital R religious didn't actually believe most of the things that the book that they said they believed in taught. And
Right.
then I found out that most of the things that were in those books were not written when people assumed they were, not written by the people they assumed they were, and not compiled when most people think they were. I realized it's time to throw that out. That was, the beginning of my deconstruction personally. And then I started to examine, these ideas of like, a capital G God, that's a person. And then I realized that the way language works, God is a title, not a name.
Mhm.
And that means someone who is, over you in basically every way. And, that's why I specifically, got rid of those ideas in my life. To me, you know, I call myself a lowercase a atheist, because capital A atheist, that has in a way kind of become a religion in of itself. You
Right.
could make that argument that
Yeah.
it is its own belief system now, and probably has been for a long time. For me, I'm a lowercase atheist. I think that it doesn't matter if I believe one way or another. If there's something there, it's there, and there's nothing I can do about it. And if there's nothing there, it's not there, and I can't do anything about that either. So, and maybe that's just how I get my peace, but I do have a lot of peace with that. What's interesting to me always is going to be what people do with their perceptions of these things. So now, through what you're telling us about, you're journeying through all this stuff, and you've gone kind of to the extremes in both, both of those directions for sure. And so with this book, it kind of shows us, in a way, kind of where you want to go with it. So, would you say that's pretty fair? This is kind of where you're going with it, or where you've gone with it?
What do you mean where I want to go with it?
Well, I mean, what's the next step after realizing for you that there is something or someone there?
Oh, I'm a constant learner. I'm always digging into, what's next to learn. So I have expanded my mind as far as, because I love talking to people, and I don't care if you're from the right, the left, you're an atheist, you're a Christian, you're a Buddhist. I don't care anymore. My job now is not to argue with you, to try to convert you to the way I believe. My job is just to love you as a person and understand where you're coming from, and realize that you believe what you believe because you've been down the road that you've been down that has caused those beliefs, and now you're in a place that you are. I mean, there's no script I can read off to try to convince you to believe otherwise, and that's not my job anyway. To where before that was my job. I just had to tell you how smart I was, and how versed I was in my religion or in atheism. So I said it wasn't until I let go of both that light bulbs just started going off. It's like, okay, wow, that opens up a whole new way of communication. So I guess my path now is just to write books to try to open people's minds to just love people and try to find the common ground, because there's just so much, like on social media, there's just so much hatred and division, and that's just a closed mind, and it was a sad way to live, and I was there. And it's just so much more freeing to live in harmony with people than in division. And I guess my next book is almost the same title, but reversed, and it's pointed towards religion.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that one coming out for sure. Yeah, I love that. I mean, we've been talking a lot about belief systems. We've been watching a lot of like cult documentaries lately. And, I agree with you of like, if we get just so entrenched in these belief systems, there's no room for that expansion or for growth of any kind, So it's like, I have my beliefs, but I'm totally open to those beliefs shifting, as I learn, as I grow, as I experience different things, as I talk to different people, and some of the things that you wrote about in your book did give me things to think about, and made me ask some of those questions that you're asking yourself of like, why do I believe what I believe? So I think that is very important to just come towards all people with an open mind, and I also, back to your point of like what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other person, but doesn't make it wrong. Like my parents are very devout Catholics, and that speaks to them and that works for them. It does not speak or work for me, and that's okay. Like I'm not saying that they're wrong, they're good people, you know their belief system and how they practice their faith isn't hurting anybody, so I don't see a problem with that, nor is my belief system hurting anybody. It's about loving people, loving myself, loving the universe.
Mm-hmm. And where I think a lot of people inside of the church get sidetracked is they get more hooked on it's almost like if you're not memorizing scripture and trying to convert people to that belief system, then you're some kind of a bad Christian or a bad influence or something like that, which is kind of shunned. And I think and I've also realized that you don't have to attend a church to, believe that there's a creator or believe that there's a God or a source of all life, or like John said, just a title. There are many attributes to a person, just as there's many attributes to like the creator. And some get hooked on each attribute being a name, and that name that they picked out has to be the one, because if you call this entity by a different name, then you somehow don't believe, mm-hmm. or you are a false believer, or some other aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the major religions, I feel like there's a lot of overlap there,
Yeah.
and they're maybe calling it or talking about it in a different way, but we're talking about a similar thing. Yeah. This is all very interesting stuff.
I do have a thought, and this is going back to about 12 minutes ago, when dog breeds were mentioned, and people who have listened to more than one episode of this will know that I just, whenever I have like any amount of knowledge about anything, I can't help myself. Dog breeds only exist because of humans. It's puppy eugenics. We have chosen to make dog breeds a thing through our own version of selective breeding. And I think that one of the reasons why we know that adaptation is a thing that is real in a very modern setting is what we have done to dogs. At one point in the lineage of a Chihuahua is a wolf.
Yes.
That's a long, long time ago, a long line back. And I think the reason why Chihuahuas are so angry is because some part of their brain remembers when there were wolves, and they know it's our fault that they're not anymore. So
that's true.
It's puppy eugenics is why dog breeds exist.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Well, I think the brain of the wolf is still inside of the Chihuahua because they think they're 10 feet tall.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely.
Every time, especially if the mailman's coming.
Yeah. So well, the paper boy. I used to be a paper boy, and there was a corner house that had 2 Chihuahuas, and they met me every time I came by with the paper to chew on my legs.
I love it. Thank you for that knowledge bomb. I appreciate that very much.
Another interesting thing that I uncovered also with the brain, which sent me down some more rabbit trails, was there's a thing in the base of your brain called the reticular activating system. And that basically lets in the information that you deem as either important or interesting. It's like before you buy a new car, you don't see it anywhere. And then once you buy that new car, all of a sudden you see it everywhere. And it's not because it wasn't there before. It's that now your reticular activating system in the back, your brain has let in that, okay, this is important to you now. So now I'm going to have you notice it all over the place, because all of our sensory organs would completely shut us down and overwhelm us if all those bits of information came in at the same time. So it's what we deem as important. So basically, that boils down to whatever you want to believe, you will find the evidence to believe it.
Mhm.
So with that knowledge, I had to tell myself, okay, I've got to be completely and brutally honest with myself. And instead of believing something because I either want to or not believing something because I have opposition to something else that I don't want to believe. And when I started digging into that, I found it's a thing called self-fulfilling prophecies, to where if you're looking for the evidence for something and you have a preconceived idea already of what you want to believe, you will find whatever evidence that you want to find in order to um, solidify your belief system. And there's also confirmation bias and willful ignorance and all that stuff that the mind plays tricks on you. So I had to completely erase all biases, all preconceived ideas, and just be brutally honest with myself and break everything down to its lowest point possible and start asking questions from there. And whatever questions I asked, it was either, okay, do I want to believe this? And am I finding the evidence because I want to believe it, or because it's full of nothing but common sense and this is the most practical, most the best answer or the best possible truth that I'm seeking? And that's when things started getting interesting.
I believe it. I mean, I think it's a very good point and something that everybody needs to be mindful of. Just because you're seeing or noticing this one pattern doesn't mean that's the complete picture, right?
Right.
There's so much more that could be out there. So you talked a couple of times about like having to release all these different belief systems. What did that look like as a process for you? How did you do this release of preconceived ideas?
A lot of quiet time
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of reflecting and a lot of just going back in my mind of all the things that I was conditioned to believe. Not because I dug it out for myself. It's because that's what somebody told me to believe. So I first started going back and rehashing all the things that I was told that I was supposed to believe, and then just broke everything down from there. And I did that on both sides of the fence,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very long process. I think I started over 20 years ago, and there's been a lot of questions and a lot of anger, a lot of frustration and confusion and everything along the way. And I'm by far from finding or knowing all the truth out there. I just know that I'm a heck of a lot more peaceful now than I was before.
So it was worth it to ask
Yes,
those questions and dig in, even if it was frustrating at times. It's been a positive in your life.
yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Peace is something you cannot put a dollar amount on.
That's exactly true.
Mm-hmm. Well, I give you a lot of credit because I think it's easier for people to just be complacent with their beliefs,
Yes.
and you've done the hard work of, let me really investigate this.
Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of the nagging voices in the back of my head that wouldn't let me rest either. I When I wanted to become complacent, the voices, and I don't mean audible voices. I just mean
Yeah.
the promptings of the
Yes.
naggings in the back of your head, the
Hmm.
questions that keep you awake at night.
Hmm. How how did your family respond to all of this with you? You pulling away from the church and asking these questions, going on, an atheist journey to now something a little bit more spiritual.
I there wasn't a whole lot of opposition. Um, I wasn't ostracized or hated for anything that I chose. It was more of a, well, it's your journey.
Mm-hmm.
Go get it. Go after it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of arguments, not a whole lot of hatred, but there was just a lot of questions, a lot of why, that kind of thing. But there was a lot of understanding there also.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Lots of things to debate.
Yes.
And I found with my family, like, sometimes seeds can be planted.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes they bloom and sometimes they don't, and that's okay, but I have seen my parents, actually the title of their episode, well, I don't know exactly what the title is, but I mean, a theme of their episode that we did with them was about them expanding from their traditional belief system. I grew up in a haunted house, and coming from a Catholic background, they well, like, we don't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that, until there's things kind of hitting them in the face where they're like, oh, we can't, there's something else going on here, so I think that people can expand, if they want to, and if they're
Yes.
ready.
Yeah. And if they're not ready, there's nothing you can say.
That's 100% true. That's true with belief. That's true with someone's sobriety. That's true with any big part of someone's life. If they're not ready to have something different in their life, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. You know, where can people find your book? Where can people find you? Plug yourself a little bit. You haven't done that yet.
Well, I have both my books are on Amazon. Um, the one title, as today we're talking, is "So You Think You're an Atheist? Questions That Haunt the Soul." My first book was Bite-Sized Life Lessons, and the subtitle is Modern Day Proverbs. There is another book on Amazon called Bite-Sized Life Lessons, I think, and it has to do with cookies, but that's not it.
It's funny.
Um, you can reach me on Facebook, Instagram, uh, at RB Thought Coach, Twitter and LinkedIn at Rick Bartrand. I do a little bit of writing on a platform called medium.com under the name of At the Voice of Expression. I think I got a YouTube channel, but I don't have a whole lot of things on there yet, so I don't usually plug that.
Okay.
So are you a coach of some sort? Can people work with you if they?
I've been advertising. I haven't got any clients yet, but I haven't really been avidly advertising. Most of my time has been spent writing books, so that's my main focus right now.
Awesome. And when is that third book going to be out?
Which one? I'm actually almost done with Bite-Sized Life Lessons Volume 2.
Okay.
I have another book called Smoking the Pipe of Contemplation, which goes a little bit deeper than Bite-Sized Life Lessons. Bite-Sized Life Lessons are just like little one-liners or short paragraphs of just inspirational sayings that pop into my head every once in a while. The other one it's a deeper dive into a little bit of stuff that we've been talking to today, and just stuff about the mind and or why we think what we think and why we do what we do. And the other one that I mentioned earlier, So You Think You're a Christian, or So You Think You're a Believer, I still haven't settled on a title yet, but that one I have all the content for, but that's going to be a while before it's edited and all put together into chapters. There's another one behind that called "So Who Is This God?" So so you think you're an atheist is on one side of the fence, so you think you're a Christian's on the other side of the fence, and then I come in the middle of who is the source of all this life, or what's going on behind the scenes type thing. So that's going to kind of be a 3-book conglomeration, and like I said, just the bite-sized life lessons. They just keep making volumes of that as they pop into my head, and smoking the pipe of contemplation is the deeper dive. Those are going to be multiple volumes. And the main one that I want to write, that I have all the material also for, is the place of truth. And that kind of takes everything I've learned for the past 20, 30 years and puts it in a easy to read form of, okay, I'm transitioning into an adult. What now? What, instead of wasting a whole lot of my time, because that's what I did growing up. Everybody looks forward to being, okay, I want to turn 10 because that's 2 digits. And then the next is I want to turn 12 because 12 is cool. Now I want to turn 16 because I can get my license. Then after you get your license, I want to turn 21 because I can start drinking. And then after you turn 21, everything just kind of blurs out. And
mostly because of the drinking.
Yeah, pretty much. And then you turn 30 and go, what the heck just happened in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
And then you spend the next 3 to 5 years trying to figure out, okay, what just happened here? And then you're 40 and then 50, and you're like, wow, where did all this time go? I have, children and things like that. And it's more of an intentional life instead of a just fly by the seat of your pants, do what comes up next. So it's just more of a directional book. And
awesome. Good deal.
That has to do with, not only teens, but because I've met 80-year-old people that are still completely lost.
Yep.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. Well, you are a busy man. You got a lot. I love it. It's after my own heart. A lot of writing projects to work on. Are you on Goodreads?
I think I am. I'm on so many things that
yeah. Because I feel like I tried looking for your book after I finished it so I could add it to my list, because I want credit from Goodreads.
From Goodreads, yeah.
I don't know if I could find it. Maybe I just missed it, but yeah. If you're not on Goodreads, get on there. So that
I remember something about Goodreads, but I'm not sure if I created an account or all author. I'm on all author. I think
all
that's
author.
And then
okay.
from there was another one called Goodreads, because I saw that on there too. So yeah, I'll look that up.
Oh no, you're on there.
Oh,
I just brought you up. Yep.
Oh, I don't know what. All right. I'm
rating you now. Let's go.
Yep. There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. This has been a very interesting and wonderful conversation.
My pleasure. I absolutely enjoyed this.
Good.
Thank you again for inviting me. This was fun.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you talking with us.
Yep, and I'll be on the lookout for your next books. Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.